As we celebrate 75 years of India's independence, it's time to look back at 75 years of the Indian auto industry. And with me, I have a person who's been very much a part of that story. In fact, for 40 years, he's influenced the course of the industry. He's a person who needs no introduction. Mr. R.C. Bhargava, founder in a way of Maruti, and still very much the chairman, non-executive chairman. So you've been at the helm of Maruti for 40 years, seen the way the industry and of course your company has grown. But Mr. Bhargava, just your perspective, 75 years, how do you think the journey has been? We were totally protectionist, totally isolated. Then suddenly we liberalized in a bit of steps, and today it's a global playing field.
You know, India was never totally protectionist before independence. We were, in fact, an absolutely laissez-faire economy and doing pretty well on the industrial front, including the car industry. Both Hindustan Motors and Premier Automobiles were established in the 40s.
And we had GM and Ford before that.
And before that, GM and Ford. So the auto industry was very much there. Things changed after 1950. The new industrial development policy.
And the Tariff Commission.
And the way we went with the industrialization. Because that meant that the car industry, being in the private sector, was totally controlled and managed according to the priorities of the planners. There was really no growth. And what could have been a very flourishing industry in India came to a stop. Now that continued till 1981, when the decision was taken to establish Maruti.
So it's quite interesting. I mean, our first Prime Minister, Mr. Nehru, put us on this different path of socialism, planned economies. One can debate whether that was right or wrong. But it's quite ironic that it was his daughter, in a way, that, inadvertently opened up the auto industry. How do you think Maruti would have happened if it wasn't for Indira Gandhi?
Actually, slight difference, Hormazd. Maruti happened because, unfortunately, Indira Gandhi's son, Sanjay, had an air accident.
You mean it was such an emotional thing?
He was absolutely committed to making a small car from India. He had a license from the government. He has established a plant. It's a different matter that he made no progress. And he was doing more road rollers than cars. But the fact was that the small car was very close to his heart. And after he died, Mrs. Gandhi decided, I think largely for sentimental reasons, that his memory would be best kept alive if a small car was manufactured in India at the same place where Sanjay had set up his plant. And that is why the assets were nationalized. A government company, Maruti Udyog Limited, was established, same name as Sanjay's except for a change of word in between. And this project started. It was again to make the project a success that, based on advice received from wise people, she decided that it should have a foreign partner, it should have foreign technology, it should make 100,000 cars a year at a time when the market was stagnant at around 35 to 40,000 cars. Foreign technology, foreign partnerships were absolutely not allowed in public sector companies. All these exceptions were made, but not because...
So would it be fair to say that, with her emotional connect with this project, that you didn't get red tape, which typically a project like this would get, but you got the red carpet?
Almost in those days, there was a height of socialism. For a car project to start in India, in the public sector, required a very red carpet.
And it was an instrument of capitalism, wasn't it? A symbol of capitalism.
It was a luxury project, completely divorced from socialistic priorities.
Right. But Mr. Bhargava, I want to know your story. I mean, you all came in, you and Mr. Krishnamurthy came in as complete novices. You didn't know the car business. I believe you all even went through world cars like as a shopping list as to what to bring. So
How would anybody in India,
Right.
particularly a guy like me, know anything about cars because nothing was available here?
right. So, but how did just run us through the selection process? You had people where at that time I'm sure a lot of the global manufacturers were very skeptical of India. I think Volkswagen came, but then I think it was Tony Schmucker. He went off to China last minute. Renault looked at us. So that must have been a little frustrating, to kind of find the right partner.
Well, it was very, very difficult to find a partner because nobody was willing to put money into equity in India with a government company in the car industry in those days. People did offer, but we'll bring in our old dies, we'll bring in our old machinery, and we'll make the car here. But that was not what was required. As you rightly said, we looked at the World Car Book and we realized the Japanese had small cars.
Right.
Now, by and large, everybody was very skeptical about the Japanese. They said Japanese are not going to come to India. We had written to them earlier, they had turned us down. But finally, they agreed that, okay, we could make one trip to Japan and see what we could do. The result of that trip was that Daihatsu became interested. And there was some interest from Mitsubishi, nobody else. When Daihatsu got interested and Suzuki saw the Daihatsu story in the India Today magazine, they suddenly decided that how can our arch rival go to India and we are not even aware of it.
Right. And that was Osamu Suzuki himself. He was quite a feisty guy.
Yeah. So suddenly there was a flurry of activity from Suzuki. And
Hamamatsu.
within a few days, a team came here. And then, of course, the whole ball got rolling.
Right. And, what was it like with, let's say, what was it like with Osamu Suzuki? I mean, was it clear that, you needed someone like him? To enter India, you need someone who's in a way dominant, who runs the ship himself. It can't be done by committee or by a board. You take that decision.
At that time, what really shaped our decision was the fact that when we met car companies in Japan, this was the only company where the president spent time with us. And it's a very small team. We met Mitsubishi. We had a meeting where there's a long table. I think there were 40 or so odd top management people sitting there, various presidents and vice presidents and God knows what. And we felt that we'll get lost.
Yeah, everyone will have their own opinion as well.
In a big company where we would never get to see the boss. And we said, here is Suzuki, they have small cars. The president is accessible and willing to get involved with us. Besides the fact, of course, that Suzuki was actually giving us the most financially attractive offer.
So, so once Suzuki came, let's talk about building the industry because there was no supplier base. Was that the challenge? I mean, was that one of the big challenges? Because you started initially, I think the first 50,000, there were a lot of them were CKD. I think the indigenization was a slow ramp up, as was the dealer network as well.
We had a phased manufacturing program. We had to get to about 93% local content in 5 years, which we managed to do. But in those days, everything was a challenge. We were a greenfield organization. We had no people. The whole factory had to be built afresh because what Sanjay had got was about to collapse. In fact, at times the roof did collapse. And people, the supply chain, the systems, the rules, regulations, how to work, dealerships, vendors, everything had to be done. So it just was, but we had the advantage of the experience of Suzuki.
Right.
And we could always ask that, look, how did you go about this task?
Right.
And that helped in shaping the way we went. I think almost the thing which when I look back, was that we were very good learners. We had a very open mind. We did not have something which I have also experienced earlier in BHAL, the feeling which many people in India, including in high positions, have, that, oh, in India, we know all about management, we know all about how to run things, we don't need a foreigner to tell us. We had an open mind.
Right.
And I think our success was partly because we could always keep learning, but we also had the local knowledge and the local experience. We had all spent a long time working in the field to adapt those learnings to fit into the Indian culture and the Indian ways of doing things.
Right.
And I think this ability to translate the Japanese excellent systems into
Indian
equally
cultures.
excellent Indian systems was one of the keys to Maruti's success.
Coming back to, let's say, you started off 83, December 14th, first car was launched. You had a good run. I think peak was 80%, but 91, economy got liberalized, 93, de-licensed. Everyone and their uncle came in. Was that I wouldn't say a worrying point for you? Because, frankly, you had no competition until then. Premier and HM were just finished. You all were ruling the roost. And now you had serious competition at that time. Were you worried at that point, at any point? I mean,
No, in fact, I had been telling our people, including our vendors and dealers, that we have to work as if we are in a competitive situation. Otherwise, you guys will all get very complacent. Just distributing cars is not going to cut very much ice in the future. And when competition came, I said, look, I told you guys be prepared for this. Now you have to show that you are capable of being the best. And our people responded very well. I don't think competition was ever anything which we were worried about, because we started exporting cars in 87, 88.
right. So you had to have that quality level.
And the reason we went for exports, and it went against all advice. Suzuki advised us against exporting.
Really? Why was that?
Even Mr. Krishnamurti, as the chairman, was not in favor of exporting, because you're not ready for it. Your cars are not good enough to export. My point about exporting was that that's the only way we will get exposed to standards which are much higher than what we have in it.
And global competition.
That's why. By getting exposed, you get exposed to demand from people of quality and performance which are much higher. I said, India today, in 87, 88, everybody thought that the Maruti car was the cat's whiskers, and that could be better. I said, that's not likely to be true. Let's see how we fare against higher standards of performance as the global competition is.
Right.
And that was one of the main reasons for the initial push towards exports. I said, it doesn't matter if we make mistakes, we learn. But we should use that learning to improve our domestic working.
Right. So, but you did have Hyundai coming in, you had the Koreans, some serious players. Where do you think you had the edge over them? And what were the mistakes you think some of the global OEMs made? I think a lot of them came in with outdated technology. They thought people would want these global brands, but maybe they underestimated the values which Indians wanted in a car.
I think most foreign companies who came to India did not really understand the Indian consumer and the Indian market. The Indian consumer had got used to Maruti's ways of buying cars and selling cars and servicing and all that.
And the low cost of ownership.
Low cost of ownership, convenience in terms of access to dealers and workshops and all, because by that time, I think the competitions really started somewhere around 96, 97.
Correct. Daewoo and all these.
Daewoo was the first one. By that time, we had had a long time to build up our organization and the network and the infrastructure.
Right.
So these people came in. Daewoo was all right. It came with a small car. And but it didn't have the organization and infrastructure which we had. But after that, many of those who came thought that, like all global markets, the Indian market would also graduate from small cars to big cars. Because that's what's happened everywhere else in the world.
Maybe happening now, but it's a lot.
It's not happening.
Okay, we'll get to that in a bit. Yeah.
But that was one mistake. The second thing was not a mistake, but it was more or less inevitable that if you enter the country and they wanted to sell cars all over the country and get known as a global manufacturer, after all, General Motors or Ford or Volkswagen. So they started sales all over India. Now their cars were too thinly spread out, either to make dealerships viable or to make their workshops viable.
Right.
And that led to a deterioration in the quality of the after-sales service.
Right.
In the kind of inconveniences customers had to undergo, both to buy cars and get them serviced, and in the cost of maintenance.
But, Mr. Bhargava, it's interesting. Obviously, you took care of the competition. Sense I got is that the biggest threat to the organization came from within. Just your perspective when you were in the thick of it, this whole spat with the government at that time, was that really probably one of the most, I wouldn't say dark period, but worrying periods for the company?
Oh, undoubtedly. I think that was a bad period for the company and for Suzuki.
Right. And there was even no new models, competition was
Because,
coming. It could have been timed worse in that way.
That time, this whole discussion about Maruti and Suzuki and our future was not being done on merits at all. It was being done on political considerations. It was being done on individual ambitions. And it had nothing to do with what the company should or should not be doing.
And making comments like, why aren't you going to indigenize the gearbox? I remember that.
Yeah, you remember that gearbox controversy? It was such a futile kind of controversy. But it happens that at times people don't look at the actual facts and the numbers and the data and take decisions based more on emotions.
Right. So that was a period of about 2-3 years where really there was no new technology coming in. Obviously, Suzuki was...
So actually more than 2-3 years.
Right. So you lost a lot of time.
We lost a lot of time and a lot of progress at that time. That's correct.
And would it be fair to say that you even were late in investing in R&D? Because quite frankly, today Suzuki still doesn't design and develop a grounds up car in India after 40 years. Argument could be that after 40 years, India should be a really global design base for all. Could it be that you all started late because you didn't want to let go of the technology until Suzuki had full control?
After the experience Suzuki had in this period, about 94, 95 till about 98, 99, would you really expect a company like that to part with technology to government as the partner? It didn't happen.
So trust was a major...
There was a complete loss of trust at that time. Yeah. Trust was very strong between government and Suzuki till this controversy started. And I think that was another factor which came in. So R&D started coming in once Suzuki got control. And the whole scheme of R&D is that the maximum possible work will now be done in India. But we will not duplicate what is already being done in Japan. The two have to work in total partnership and supplement each other's efforts. After we have started building our R&D here, that big Rohtak R&D center, Suzuki has not been expanding the R&D in Japan at all.
It's all been
and all that's going to happen, and you'll hear more about this as we go along. More and more, the R&D will all be happening in India.
Right. So India is going to be leading the R&D development. Naturally, we've got the volume.
We will certainly be the main source of R&D for Suzuki in the future.
Right. And, Mr. Bhargava, I just want to come to the structure of the car market. We're a small car market. I mean, obviously, that mindset, the shape, the structure of the market has been undoubtedly molded by Maruti, came in with small cars. Theoretically, we shouldn't be a small car market because we are large families. We want the maximum car with the minimum price, which is one reason, in a way, for the IndyCar success, if I might add. It may not have had the quality, but they did hit
Exactly. Indica succeeded only because it was a large car with a small price.
Correct. What is that secret sauce in that? Is it, I think, is it knowing your customer so well that you give him exactly what he wants, not more, not less, so you can make the margin and control the cost?
Hormazd, it goes right at the start designing the plant. The Suzuki cost of capital cost of putting up a 100,000 car plant was lower than anybody else's 100,000 car plant. If you look at what happened in India when Ford put up a plant or GM put up a plant, the cost difference was enormous.
Correct.
And that is their skill. And that is Mr. Suzuki's eye, let me say, for some of these things. He sees exactly where he can cut costs.
There are some great stories of him. Once he came and he went back and then people were taking staplers away because he said you don't need more than one stapler for 5 people.
He
right?
had a tremendous sense of how to reduce cost.
Right. That was his, I think,
this
genius.
low-cost, frugal management. And that is what India needs, by the way. That is what led to this small car thing. It's not that the Indian market changed because of Maruti. Maruti succeeded in growing because it actually met the real needs of the Indian market. We don't think the customer is important in India.
Right.
In fact, the real success comes to companies who understand what the customer wants. And that is one of the reasons why we maintain that still for a long time, the Indian customer will prefer small cars. If you have a country where 210 million people have scooters, you think it's a country where you can have large volumes of big cars?
But Mr. Bhargava, I'm now jumping to the future to counter you on this. Some would argue with the data and what's happening is that the market is moving towards bigger cars. Fact also is regulation is making small cars even more less viable. So it's again pushing, let's say the market upwards. A lot of people feel that the small car has now got limited shelf life, but what you're saying is it's still got huge potential.
It has still got huge, because what will happen if you cut out the small car market by making it very costly? The car market in India will shrink. The kind of people who upgrade from two-wheelers...
But isn't the small car market also shrinking right now if you see the data?
It's because of the price.
Right.
If you look at what's happened since 2019, the price went up once this regulations came in of BS6 and things.
And even the crash.
And the financial cost and things. And the market shrunk 28%. The proportion of the market has changed because it's not because the big cars have grown. Within the big cars, the SUVs have grown while the sedans have gone down.
Right.
But look at the total car number sales in India. We are still lower than what we were in 2018-19.
Right.
So it's not as if the market is growing and big cars are going. Because if only big cars were growing, then the market would have been growing. The market is not growing.
Yep, I hear what you say, but Mr. Bhargava, I'll also say that, with your kind of, confidence in the small car market and presumably even Maruti, Suzuki's, this focus on the small car, maybe you all have missed the bigger picture, which is SUVs and, loss of market
share. No, we
share
are very much in the SUV market.
But you've been quite late to the party, that's what I'm saying.
Because we were developing other models, we were doing the BS6. We had much more work to do because we have 17, 18 models to convert.
Right.
And, but it's not going to make, we are in this business for the long term.
Yeah.
We are not for the quarterly result kind of.
No. I mean, in fact, this is Suzuki's make or break is India. I mean, that's how it is.
And we will get the market in the bigger SUV segment.
Right.
But I am pretty confident that the small car market will remain very much a requirement for the Indian market. Whether people will be able to get the cars or not, I don't know. They may have to go back per force to two-wheelers.
Right.
But that, I think, will be an unfortunate trend for the Indian market, that more and more people who would have normally bought a small car have to buy two-wheelers.
Right. But do you also see it as an opportunity because almost everyone has vacated the lower end of the market? I mean, whether it's Hyundai, whoever
because it's becoming unviable for them.
Exactly. So is that even an opportunity which,
Well, we've always had a dominant place in the small car market.
Right. So you think, you really think small cars should be kind of given...
Not only small cars should be, and when you talked about this for 4 meters and not 4, what is the tax on a 4 meter today? It's 28% plus some cess.
Correct.
And then you have the states which levy initial road tax and things. So it actually goes up to 37, 38%. What is the global tax on big cars even?
Yeah, much less than that.
In Europe, VAT is 17% or 18%. Japan is 10%.
Right.
That's the affordability factor.
Correct.
So it's true, the bigger cars become even more costly in India. But all cars in India today are much more heavily taxed.
But Mr. Bhargav, in your time, in your tenure, I remember we had a peak excise at that time of 66%.
Sure.
That was really punitive.
Sure.
So, I mean, we've come down from that. At least those days, it's not. So, do you think that comes to one point, you know, in all your years, I mean, let's look at from independence, one thing that hasn't changed, it seems that a car is still seen as a luxury. And it's always, we're only seeing EVs now because the government wants it at 5%. But do you feel we've still kind of got this hang up of cars being a luxury? And for the elite?
See, I'm not sure if everybody thinks it's luxury, because I've met many people in government who recognize the crucial importance of the car industry for growth of manufacturing, growth for employment, growth for the economy. And that recognition was not there earlier. It is, I think, very much there today. The problem with government is revenues. And this high taxation on cars is partly because of revenue considerations.
But there's an argument, you lower the taxation, you'll get more volume, the revenue.
Yeah, but that happens over a period of time.
Right.
What happens in the intermediate 2-3 years?
Right.
There is a chicken and egg problem there. Because if you announce in advance that I will lower the tax after 3 years, people will stop buying cars.
Right.
And if you announce that I'm lowering the tax now, companies don't have the capacity to meet the demand.
Yeah.
So there is an issue there which you have to deal with.
Right.
How do you do this?
Yeah. And Mr. Bhargav, in your, all the years you've been involved with the auto industry for decades now, talking about regulation, you've seen 40 years of regulation up and down. We've had bans, we've had taxes going up, all that sort of thing. But of late, there's been a lot of ad hocism in terms of whether it's 6 airbags or ethanol or suddenly going from BS4 to BS6 in record time. Do you think this has been very disruptive? And it looks like you see the market, the way it's shrunk. Maybe it's because cars have become expensive. People have had to rationalize model lines. They say, these cars we're going to stop because we just can't meet the regulations. Choice has become smaller. Just your thoughts over 40 years, how is the regulation journey kind of trending?
See, I think having the BS6 regulations is a good thing. I think the attempt to lower road deaths is obviously commendable.
Right.
Can't fault those things. But we have to also recognize that the Indian market is not one uniform market. I have sometimes said that India has two markets. One is the Bharat market and one is the India market. The India market in most respects is very similar to the European and the Japanese markets and should have all these regulations and all the safety factors and things like that. Because people there not only can afford it, but they are aspiring to those standards. So it's appropriate that we have it. But at the same time, you have to recognize that the bulk of the Indian people today are still in the very low income category. These people also require personal transport. They're also aspiring to move up a little bit with personal mobility. They have families, they have businesses. How to cater to this segment? If you apply the same standards to this group of people as you apply to the India market, it's not going to work.
But can we have two standards?
That's the issue. That's partly what that 4-meter thing tried to address.
Right.
But I think that needs to be further refined now. And I'm not saying I have an answer straight away, but I think the problem of how to deal with this lower end of the market, and as well how to deal with the two-wheeler safety, because 40-odd% of the road deaths are two-wheelers. How to deal with this problem needs to be looked at.
It's a bigger problem.
It's a bigger problem. You can't ignore this factor and just say that because people like you and I can afford SUVs and the big cars, that's the right thing to do.
Right.
Somebody has to look at the needs of the, let's say, the lower middle class.
You know, Mr. Bhargava, throughout this fascinating chat we've had, the sense one gets is your thought and your focus has been at the affordable end, because that's really where the bulk is. And our motorization is still very low. I don't know whether it's, I forget the stats, maybe it's 20 per thousand. I don't know what it is right now.
It's 25 or 26.
25 just now, yeah, okay. When do you see us, I'm now talking a bit into the future, when do you see us coming out of this, you know, becoming, let's say, a more mainstream car market, or more, let's say...
where we had, let's say, 150 cars 1,000, like China has.
Right.
Incomes have to go up.
Yeah.
Incomes relation to cost of cars. The ratio between income and the cost of a car.
Direct relation.
There's a direct relationship. And that is something which nobody should forget. That car sales jumped in all these countries when there was a certain point reached between this ratio between the income level and the cost of a car.
Mr. Bhargava, just to wind up, you know, we've looking ahead, we've talked about 75 years. We've had a peak market share of 82% Maruti. Right now, as we are celebrating 75 years of independence, you've dropped well below 50. You were rarely below 50. Clearly, Maruti has dropped the ball also somewhere. I don't know where it is, whether it's, you know, let's say not coming into SUVs, more competition, or more people, you know, coming in with more investment and faster to the market, more aggressive in their pricing. What are your thoughts of Maruti going ahead? And also, we've got this whole electrification push, which I know you all are have serious plans about. But 75 years, you all are right now at around 47%, which is well below, you know, what your, let's say, market share typically has been at.
I think we're going to recover a good part of this market share. I think the SUVs, which will start biting in the second half of this year and then next year, you'll see this SUV market share will go up. Our market share of the other cars is not going to go down. If anything, it will probably go up. And overall, we'll have a much better market share. So that part I'm not worried about. In any case, as the car market is growing, and let's say if we continue to grow at 6, 7, 8% a year, the volumes will keep growing. And sometimes it's not possible to maintain as high a market share, like you mentioned, 80%, when the market grows. So we have to look at market share totally, but also a total volume of production.
Is this a time when the auto industry is facing the maximum pressure, transition to EVs, costs are going through the roof of materials, commodities, everything?
Sure.
I mean, cars are becoming less affordable, which in a way is a huge threat to even what Maruti promises. We had discussed that. And just your thoughts on EVs also, because let's leave the charging infrastructure and power and all that. Just the cost is quite expensive. I think even your EV would be around 12, 13 lakhs to start with, which is quite expensive.
I'm not sure the price at this point, I can't say. But EVs, even if they come at 12, 13 lakhs, that's pretty affordable for a lot of people.
Right.
But unfortunately, EVs actually tend to cost more if you build in factors for greater safety, greater range, quicker chargeability. All of that puts the cars up. So we will get into EVs. We have to get into EVs. But in India, EVs alone are not going to be the answer for a long time. And there are many reasons for that, including the mix of our energy generation, the fact that our power demand is growing and we are not growing fast enough in generating non-thermal energy
renewable sources,
that
we need
fast.
renewable sources, yeah.
The fact of affordability, So those factors are very much there. And I think we need to look at a lot of optionals for reducing the carbon footprint. I am a strong believer that we should reduce carbon footprint as quickly as possible.
Right.
I strongly believe in that.
So the enemy is CO2, not necessarily the IC engine.
Exactly. And if I can reduce the CO2 things by a hybrid car, or I can reduce it by using ethanol, or I can use it by using biogas and CNG, why not all of these along with electric vehicles?
Right.
I'm not convinced that the correct policy is to focus only on EVs and not look at these other options which at this point of time may not look globally as attractive as thing, but for the Indian customer and for the Indian small car market, these are more practical and affordable options. And do what you can for the electric car market. We will do what we can for the electric car market. Simultaneously, reduce the carbon footprint of the other cars which are non-electric by giving some incentives to this kind of fuel adoption.
Right, right. And absolutely last question, Mr. Bhargav. 40 years, you've been, let's say, if you take 75 years, that's more than half of the history of independent India and the auto industry. What would you say are your personal highlights, or that's something that's really, you're really happy to have achieved in this journey?
At this stage, one realizes happiness comes not from what you have achieved for yourself. It comes from what you have done, which has affected the lives of others.
So is it putting a nation on wheels, for example?
Like that. Right. Given jobs to lots of people, found ways of people making, when I look at all the people who have, because of Maruti and the way we worked and how we did, who have gone from nothing to big companies, big employer generations, big wealth creators. That is what gives happiness.
Right, right.
Personal achievements don't matter that much.
Mr. Bhargav, thank you very much.
Thank you.
A real pleasure.
Thank you.
You're really a doyen of the industry, and it's been an honor and pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.